President.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, yesterday I talked about an amendment that is absolutely crucial that we include in this legislation. Again, I commend the Chairman, Senator McCain, and the Ranking Member, Senator Reid, for their work on this underlying bill. But there is something missing. And it's very clear to everybody who's looking at this issue objectively, particularly what's going on right now on the eastern border of Ukraine. We do not have the ability in Europe, because we've pulled our armored units out, to be able to say with credibility that we have the capacity to address the very real challenge now, unfortunately, that's emerging in Europe. So last night, as some of you know, Russian and separatist forces launched an offensive again. I'm told that it is the largest attack since the February Minsk agreement. So this is just what so many people predicted, including President Poroshenko and others in Ukraine, which is things are heating up again on the eastern border of Ukraine. And the NATO forces, the United States of America in particular, need to be sure they have in Europe the ability at least to have some credibility to say we can respond to this. We've moved our armored units out, meaning there are not Abrams tanks there, except for a few units that are up in the Baltics on a temporary basis this spring. I visited them a couple months ago. They're doing a terrific job, but they're leaving. And what the Army has said is we want to allow our troops who are there to be able to up armor, particularly with a weapon, a 30-millimeter cannon rather than a 50 caliber machine gun on our Stryker vehicles, to be able to have some credibility there, to be able to say that we have armored units in Europe that can respond to these new challenges. The Army's asked for this. The Army wants this. They're pleading for it because the soldiers who are there know that they can't be able to perform their mission without this enhanced capability. Now, we had this debate yesterday on the floor, and I don't think that Senator Reid and other Democrats necessarily disagree with the substance of this amendment. What they have said is they're concerned about the pay-for. Well, let's talk about the pay-for. The pay-for is taking this out of an account that is already being used for other purposes. It's already being used by the House Armed Services Committee. In fact, the House Armed Services Committee has already taken more funds out of this account than all the funds in the SAS committee, the Senate committee, plus this amount that I believe ought to be taken out of this account. This is called the Foreign Currency Fluctuation Account at the Department of Defense. GAO, which is a body that looks at these issues from our perspective, from a legislative branch perspective, they are the auditors. GAO has estimated the Pentagon will have $1.86 billion in surplus from these fluctuations by the end of fiscal year 2016.
Senator's time has expired.
I ask unanimous consent for 3 additional moments.
Is there objection? Without objection.
So GAO has looked at this. They've said there's $1.86 billion in surplus from these fluctuation accounts at the end of fiscal year 2016. They have actually updated their figures now with even more recent data, and they've just adjusted the 2016 surplus even higher to $2.02 billion. No one has produced a currency projection to counter this GAO estimate. So we're talking about over $2 billion in this account that's available. And by the way, the money we're talking about here is not going to be taken and used for other readiness priorities, because the SAS bill has already swept up that money for readiness. This money will be sitting in a reserve fund. Pentagon doesn't need to be sitting on this size of a reserve fund, essentially a slush fund. When we do have these needs that have been identified, the Army has made a formal request for these. They have asked for assistance here. These deployed units need this assistance. They've said they need it. We ought to put this to good use, namely for an urgent requirement like this one. Again, if you look at the House bill versus the Senate bill, the House has used more of this funding in this reserve fund, this slush fund, than we have used, even when you include this additional requirement that I'm talking about today. So this notion that somehow we can't do this because the offset isn't good, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit with what GAO has said. It doesn't fit with what the House has done. So I don't know what the objection is, but I tell you what, if you vote against this, then you are saying that our troops in Europe ought not to have the capability they have asked for, they need. Admittedly, this came late, and I'm sorry about that. And they should have come with it sooner. This was a requirement that they had identified, but they had identified needing it later, by 2020. Now they need it now. And they need it now because the situation has changed in Europe. We have to be flexible to be able to respond to that change. If we wait another 12 months, another year to do this, who knows what's going to happen? But I know one thing, having been in Eastern Europe recently, I know that those countries of Eastern Europe, and in fact, those countries on the European continent, are NATO partners in particular, but also Ukraine. They are looking to the United States of America to show the commitment that we have made on paper, to ensure that we have that commitment in terms of our capability on the ground in Europe. Again, this is an issue where I think we should come together as Democrats and Republicans. It's a bipartisan amendment. I commend Senator Peters for identifying this need with the Army. I understand Senator Reid's concern that this came late in the process, but it's here. The request has been made, and I would sure hope that we would be able to come together today, given what's happening right now on the eastern border of Ukraine, to ensure that we send a strong message that at a minimum, we're going to meet these requirements that the Army has insisted that they need to be able to give our troops what they need to be able to keep the peace in this important part of the world. I thank you for the time, Mr. President. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back my time.